I had just climbed out of the pool when Karen screamed that I was violating her cat's rights to sunlight harmony. I thought it was a joke until I saw the official HOA citation in my mailbox 2 hours later. The offense? My pool's reflection was too intense and emotionally destabilizing to the neighborhood. The day that changed everything started like any other. I, Michael, woke up early, threw on my swim trunks, and headed out to the backyard to soak in the morning peace. The water shimmered perfectly under the soft sun. Birds chirped, and for a moment, life was exactly how I liked it. Calm. Simple. Mine. But that peace shattered the second a sharp, shrill voice cut through the air like a lawn-mower slicing gravel. "Excuse me, sir." "Yes, you. Do you even care what your pool is doing to the community?" I blinked water out of my eyes and looked up, only to find Karen. Yes, the Karen, standing just outside my backyard fence with her arms crossed, a clipboard in one hand and a disgusted frown glued to her face. Her short, overly hairsprayed bob trembled with rage as she waved her pen around like she was directing air traffic. "Morning, Karen," I said, already sensing the headache building behind my eyes. She didn't even acknowledge the greeting. "The light reflecting from your pool is hitting my upstairs guest room window at precisely 9:17 a.m. and disrupting my cat's circadian rhythm." I stared at her, soaking wet and baffled. "I'm sorry, what now?" She snapped the clipboard up. HOA Regulation 7.4c. Light pollution from any external water feature must not affect adjacent homes. You'll be receiving a notice to install a pool cover immediately. And then she left, just like that. Didn't wait for a reply. Just turned on her heel and marched off like she was queen of the cul-de-sac. I spent the next few hours in disbelief. Surely no one could actually enforce something like that. It had to be Karen just being Karen. But my hopes crumbled that afternoon when I opened my mailbox and found an envelope stamped with that cursed HOA logo. The citation inside was real, signed by none other than Karen herself, who had apparently called for an emergency meeting with the HOA board that morning. I wasn't invited, naturally. I called Thomas, my neighbor 2 doors down, and one of the quieter members of the HOA. He sounded tired. "Yeah, man," he sighed. "She pushed it through. Said your pool's glare was a safety hazard." To her cat. To the entire community, apparently. Something about ocular stress and distracted drivers. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Has anyone else had to install a pool cover?" "No," Thomas said. "Just you." Of course, Karen had some personal vendetta. It wasn't about safety or cats or sunlight. She just didn't like that I'd built something nice that she couldn't control. My pool had become her white whale. Still, I figured it wasn't worth the fight. For the next few days, I draped a big blue tarp over the water. It looked hideous. Every time I glanced out the window, it was like seeing a wounded whale lying in my yard. Worse, it trapped heat and made the water murky and gross. But Karen wasn't satisfied. I caught her peeking over the fence more than once. One morning, I saw a small drone buzzing above my backyard. The thing hovered directly above the pool, then zipped off toward her house. The next day, another complaint arrived, this time about incomplete coverage. She'd actually filed an HOA violation over a flap of tarp that had flipped up in the wind. That was the breaking point. I walked past her property later that afternoon just to get some air and clear my head. Her yard was spotless, of course, manicured lawn, symmetrical flower beds, every blade of grass the same height. But what really caught my attention was the position of her backyard. It sat directly behind mine, slightly downhill and wide open to the back view from my pool deck. And that's when the spark ignited. If she wanted my pool covered so badly, fine. I'd cover it. I'd cover it with something she'd never forget. I spent the evening sketching out a plan. What if I installed a platform over the pool? Something fully compliant with HOA regulations, protective, permanent, safe, but made entirely of tempered glass? Thick, elevated, and engineered with steel supports so that it stretched outward, hovering just over the fence line, extending out over her yard, transparent, unapologetically visible. The more I thought about it, the more it made perfect, poetic sense. Karen had declared war over a reflection. She wanted control over what I did in my own yard. Fine. She'd get a cover, one that let her see exactly what she hated most, me enjoying my pool above her perfect lawn, every single day. I needed confirmation. I called in a favor from my friend Olivia, a structural engineer. I laid out the design, and instead of laughing, she said, "Dude, this is genius. You're trolling her with architecture." We ran some numbers, calculated the weight-bearing needs, and figured out how to anchor the glass panels into concrete supports around the pool's perimeter. The design would make it look like a floating skywalk, completely safe and technically a roof, because HOA bylaws didn't define what a cover had to look like, only that it had to protect the pool and be in line with community standards. I pulled the HOA guidelines again and read them 3 times. There was no clause against glass, no clause against elevation, no clause against extending slightly beyond property lines, so long as there was no contact with adjacent soil. I wasn't breaking any rules. I was just bending them so far they practically loop. But I knew Karen. She wouldn't go down without a fight. She'd scream. She'd protest. She'd throw every tantrum she had left in her clipboard-wielding soul. And honestly, I couldn't wait to see it. By the end of the week, I had hired a contractor, filed for a permit, and booked a consultation with the HOA itself. I wanted to be ready. If Karen wanted a war, I was going to give her the most beautiful, legally bulletproof act of revenge this neighborhood had ever seen. Not just a pool cover, a monument. The day I met with the contractors, I could barely contain my excitement. I had no intention of hiding it either. I stood there by the pool, pointing at the spot where the glass structure would begin, explaining the vision like a man on the edge of architectural rebellion. The contractor, a stocky guy named Diego with sunglasses permanently welded to his face, scratched his beard as I described the design. A massive tempered glass platform supported by steel beams, starting over my pool and extending out just enough to hover legally above Karen's precious backyard. At first, Diego thought I was joking. Then he saw the seriousness in my eyes and the HOA violation letter pinned to my corkboard with a steak knife. We walked around the pool's edge while I described the materials. The platform had to be strong enough to walk on, swim beneath, and last decades. Diego nodded as I talked, occasionally stopping to measure distances or sketch on his clipboard. When I explained how the elevation would allow sunlight to pass through but still technically cover the pool, his eyebrows raised in admiration. He didn't say much, but I could tell he was already calculating how to make it happen. He called it a rich man's spite project and promised to send me a quote by the evening. That same day, I visited City Hall to inquire about permits. A young guy named Marcus at the counter flipped through my application and blueprint. He looked confused for a moment, then gave a low whistle and grinned. "You're covering your pool with a sky bridge?" he asked. "Technically, yes," I replied. "Glass is a valid material, and I'm not exceeding any height restrictions." He nodded slowly, then stamped the forms with a loud thunk that echoed through the hallway. "You got yourself a permit, my man." He leaned in and added in a low voice, "You've also got my respect." Of course, Karen found out before sunset. She must have someone feeding her information from city records, or she stalked the permit office in her free time like a nosy bat. I knew she would go ballistic the second she heard construction was happening on my property, especially since she had assumed her complaint would force me into submission. She showed up the next morning while Diego and his crew were unloading beams. She marched up in a cocky tracksuit like she was leading a protest, waving her HOA badge like it was a sheriff's star. "This is illegal," she shrieked before even introducing herself to the workers. "This is visual pollution. I demand to see your construction permit." Diego looked at me. I smiled and handed her a crisp copy of the city's stamped approval. She stared at it like it was a forged treasure map. "This can't be right," she muttered, flipping pages. You're going to hover something over my yard." "It's not touching your yard," I said calmly. "It just floats nearby. HOA regulations don't restrict airspace not occupied by permanent contact. Look it up, Section 9, Subclause F." She looked like she'd swallowed a lemon whole. Her mouth opened, then closed. She spun on her heel and stormed off without another word. The workers chuckled and got back to laying the steel base. Over the next few days, the structure began to rise. First came the anchors, dug deep into the sides of my yard. Then the beams, arranged like a rib cage of defiance, started climbing skyward. Diego's team worked with quiet efficiency, and by the end of the week, the platform had started to take shape, floating almost 12 feet above the ground, supported by sleek, matte black columns. From a distance, it looked like a spaceship docking. The glass panels arrived in massive crates. Each one was 2 inches thick, frosted at the edges for safety but clear in the middle, like a crystal lake. As the workers carefully fitted them together like puzzle pieces, people from the neighborhood started showing up to gawk. One couple from down the street brought lawn chairs and coffee just to watch the progress. Karen, of course, was never far away. I caught her multiple times pacing her yard like a general surveying an incoming invasion. She tried to take photos, probably to send to the HOA board, but she never found any violations. Every measurement was exact, every inch documented, every code meticulously followed. I'd made sure of it. That's when she changed tactics. She tried to stop the project through the HOA itself. I received a formal notice citing community unity concerns and psychological distress induced by aggressive structures. It was obviously written by Karen, likely using a thesaurus to make it sound official. But I was ready. I showed up to the board meeting with a stack of papers, permits, guidelines, photos, even testimonies from neighbors who said they supported the structure. One of them was Thomas, who'd had enough of Karen's tyranny and was more than happy to stand beside me. When Karen saw Thomas supporting me, she lost it. This is not just about rules. She snapped. This is about respect, tradition, and property values. Then maybe respect should start with not flying drones into my yard, I replied, holding up one of her drone videos that I had caught on security footage. The room went dead silent. Even the board president looked uncomfortable. Karen stormed out. Again, back home, the final piece of glass was lowered into place by a crane. It slid in with a gentle clink, sealing the structure into a solid, shimmering canopy. From below, you could still see the sky. From above, you could see straight through to the shimmering pool water and the glimmering ripples dancing on the floor. But the most breathtaking view wasn't for me. It was for Karen. From her back porch, her once pristine lawn now had a new ceiling. My glass floor stretched like a floating mirror of rebellion. Her guests wouldn't just see her roses. They'd see swimmers gliding through blue light. They'd hear splashes and laughter. Her oasis had become a fishbowl beneath a sky of defiance, and I hadn't broken a single rule. The morning after the final panel was installed, Karen called the police. I was sipping coffee in my bathrobe on the back patio, admiring the sunrise glow filtering through the glass above, when 2 officers showed up at my gate. One of them had the polite but tired look of a man who'd seen too many neighbor disputes, while the other was younger and clearly curious. I welcomed them with a warm "good morning" and offered them a seat, which they awkwardly declined. The senior officer held up a notepad. We received a call from a resident claiming there was a structure violating residential airspace laws and causing potential safety hazards. I gestured up at the glass platform. That would be my pool cover. The younger officer squinted at it, clearly impressed. This is a pool cover. Meets all the specs, I said. Permitted, reinforced, safety rated. Want to see the documents. They looked at each other, shrugged, and nodded. I went inside and returned with a thick folder of city permits, HOA regulations, and engineering reports, signed and sealed by professionals. As they reviewed the papers, Karen hovered on the edge of her property line, arms flailing, phone in hand, lips moving furiously into a live stream. She says you're spying, the older officer said, almost apologetically. I haven't once looked down into her yard, I replied, but her drone flew into mine at least 4 times this month. Got proof of that. Security camera footage. Want to see it? They did. I brought out my tablet and showed them time-stamped clips of her little drone buzzing over my pool like a lost fly, sometimes dipping within inches of my patio umbrella. The older officer shook his head and muttered something about needing a vacation. They left after 20 minutes, promising to file a report but clearly realizing this wasn't about law. It was about spite. Karen's live stream ended abruptly when the officers gave her a warning for wasting their time. She stormed back inside without a word, slamming her sliding door so hard a wind chime fell off her porch. But Karen wasn't done. That afternoon, a crew of landscapers arrived on her property. They began erecting 20-foot wooden poles along her backyard, attaching long swaths of heavy canvas from pole to pole. Within hours, she had created an ugly wall of beige fabric surrounding her entire lawn. It blocked the view of the glass, sure, but it also blocked all sunlight, airflow, and any beauty her garden once had. Neighbors began whispering. Some stopped me on my driveway and asked what on earth was going on. I explained with a smile. Most of them laughed. A few shook their heads and walked away muttering. Thomas came by with a six-pack and pulled up a lawn chair just to admire the ridiculous tarp fortress. "She's trying to block the sky," he said between sips. "That's next level." I nodded. It's like watching someone bury themselves in their own yard. The spectacle became the talk of the neighborhood. Karen tried to spin it as an act of reclaiming her privacy. She emailed the HOA claiming the tarp wall was temporary, artistic, and a protective measure against visual harassment. But she had overplayed her hand. Residents were annoyed. Some were angry. A few who had been neutral now began quietly organizing. That's when someone nominated me for HOA president. I laughed at first, thinking it was a joke. But then I saw the flyer, my face on a mock campaign poster with the words, "Transparency Matters," and a photo of the glass platform glowing under the sunset. Whoever made it had a wicked sense of humor. It wasn't my idea, but suddenly people were asking me what changes I'd make if I were in charge. I hadn't planned to run, but Karen's behavior had pushed people too far. They were tired of being ruled by fear and fines. They were tired of the constant threats about mailbox heights and hedge shapes and dog leash length. They wanted to live, not survive under a clipboard dictatorship. Karen caught wind of the campaign and went berserk. She went door to door warning residents that I was trying to turn the neighborhood into a glassed city and that property values would plummet under my rule. She even sent out a newsletter calling me a dangerous anarchist with a vendetta against lawns, but nobody took it seriously anymore. The woman who built a tarp prison to block a pool cover was not exactly winning hearts. Then came the rainstorm. A heavy thunderstorm rolled in one evening, battering the tarp wall with wind and water. The poles bent, the fabric ripped, and by morning, the entire structure had collapsed like a soggy tent. Her backyard was a mess. Mud, broken poles, torn cloth hanging from trees. But through the broken canopy, something magical had happened. The glass platform, wet from the rain, refracted the sunlight into 1,000 tiny rainbows that danced across her ruined lawn. It was like nature itself had decided to troll her. The light reflected in perfect arcs and glimmering patterns, turning her backyard into a psychedelic light show. And the best part, several kids and teenagers from nearby homes gathered along the sidewalk just to take pictures. They posed, laughed, called it rainbow heaven. Karen screamed at them to leave, but they only laughed louder. By that afternoon, her lawn was trending online. A local meme page uploaded a picture of her backyard with the caption, "When you build a privacy tarp and unlock the power of Skittle Rain." Her lawn had become an accidental tourist spot, all thanks to the very thing she tried to destroy. That night, as I floated on my back in the pool and looked up at the clear glass above, I could see the stars twinkling, unbothered by her drama. The light from the pool shimmered upward, casting a gentle glow. I thought about how much chaos had come from something so simple, just a man trying to enjoy his own space. Karen had declared war over a reflection. Now that reflection was casting light not just into her yard, but into the cracks of her authority. The community had seen what she was willing to do to keep control, and they were no longer amused. It was no longer just about a pool. It was about power, pride, and petty revenge spiraling out of her control. And I hadn't even hosted my party yet. The first sign that Karen's downfall was complete came not from a formal notice or a confrontation, but from the sound of silence. For weeks, the neighborhood had lived under the constant hum of her complaints. her clipboard taps, her barking into phones. Then suddenly, nothing. No patrols, no flyers, no HOA notices duct taped to mailboxes like warning posters. Just quiet. A strange, almost unnatural quiet that made you wonder if a storm had passed or was still brewing. I didn't trust it at first, but the truth was, Karen had lost the one thing she couldn't function without: control. After her suspension, she holed up inside her house like a retreating general, blinds drawn, porch untouched, her once flourishing garden now wilting in the spring heat. The meme videos had taken on a life of their own. I saw a parody TikTok where someone reenacted her kiddie pool fall in slow motion, complete with dramatic orchestral music. Even the local news ran a light-hearted segment about HOA drama turning into backyard inspiration, featuring a blurry photo of my glass platform, calling it a monument to peaceful resistance. She tried to fight back. She filed a defamation claim against the meme page that originally posted her fall, but it was laughed out of the system. The footage had been filmed from public space and didn't violate any laws. She appealed, then quietly dropped the case when her own drone footage was submitted as evidence of harassment. It became clear to everyone that she wasn't a victim. She was the architect of her own collapse. Her last desperate attempt to salvage control came in the form of a yard sale. One Sunday morning, she set up tables along her driveway and arranged neat rows of trinkets, gardening tools, and plastic storage bins labeled with handwritten tags. It wasn't the stuff that caught people's attention. It was the sign taped to her mailbox: moving sale, final week. Word spread like wildfire. She was selling the house. A few curious neighbors wandered by, pretending to browse, mostly just wanting to confirm the rumors. I didn't go. I didn't need to. Just seeing the packed boxes stacked against her window, the moving van parked awkwardly outside for 2 days straight, was enough to confirm it. Karen was leaving. Her castle, her clipboard kingdom, was no longer hers. I heard later that she sold the house to a young couple. They were quiet, polite, and uninterested in HOA drama. I met them the week after they moved in. They knocked on my door with a gift basket, wine, crackers, local honey, and introduced themselves as Jamie and Alina. I gave them a tour of the glass platform, and Jamie looked up in awe while Alina giggled and said, "So this is the famous pool cover." I laughed and said, "It's better viewed at night." In the months that followed, the neighborhood transformed. The HOA, under new leadership, became less about control and more about community. We created a shared garden initiative, allowed for decorative lawn creativity, and even hosted a neighborhood potluck, something that had been banned during Karen's reign due to property damage concerns. People smiled more, kids played more freely, dogs barked without triggering anonymous complaints. Life flowed again. The most surprising development came from Karen's old backyard. The couple who bought her place tore down the tarp poles, planted new trees, and built a small meditation garden. But instead of ignoring the glass platform above, they leaned into it. They installed soft lights that illuminated the underside of the glass at night, creating a layered visual effect between my pool above and their peaceful garden below. It was breathtaking, peaceful, surreal. They even put a bench directly under the widest stretch of glass. People started calling it the reflection spot. It became a favorite photo location, and some neighbors used it for family portraits. One evening, I saw an older man sitting there, eyes closed, just listening to the trickle of water from their new fountain and the faint sounds of my pool filter humming above. It struck me then that this ridiculous war over a pool cover had accidentally built something beautiful, a neighborhood monument not just to pettiness and resistance, but to transformation. Karen's attempt to dominate everyone had led to a symbol of freedom she never intended to create. That night, floating on my back in the pool, I stared through the glass at the garden below. The lights shimmered like stars trapped beneath the surface. I realized how far we'd come from HOA threats and police visits to a community that had rediscovered joy through shared struggle. I remembered all the moments that led here: the first HOA letter, the drone, the tarp fortress, the viral fall, the party, the vote, and finally, the silence. It all felt like a story told in 5 acts, and I'd somehow lived each chapter in my own backyard. I didn't hear from Karen again, but I later saw a post from her on a neighborhood group in a different town. She was arguing with someone over fence paint. Her tone hadn't changed. Her tactics hadn't either. She just found a new audience. I closed the tab and didn't look again. There was no need to. Here in this cul-de-sac, we had won, not with yelling or revenge, but with patience, planning, and just the right amount of pettiness delivered through polished glass. It's funny how something as simple as a pool cover became the most complex thing I'd ever built. Not because of the engineering, but because of what it represented. You can follow every rule and still be accused of rebellion. You can be kind and still be called the enemy. But if you stand your ground, if you protect your peace, even when the clipboard brigade comes knocking, you just might find that your biggest act of defiance becomes your proudest legacy. And sometimes, the best way to respond to being forced to cover your pool is to cover it in glass, float it over your enemy's yard, and let the sun do the rest.